Guys, plenty of time. Good morning. Happy Friday. So I'm scrolling down on Thursday. We all watched this instructional video, front side, three-quarter view, and bottom view of the nose. I expected everyone to turn in the proof of practice of all four. And this was the starting stages. So today we're just completing it. We are finishing those stages. So everybody should turn in step one yesterday. This. And then we're working on step two, adding the ball. And then we're working on step three, which is completing these sketches. Okay. So you should be turning this in as your proof of practice today. I can't spell. It's because I'm sitting funny. Practice today. So I made that very easy. Most of you probably finished drawing this yesterday, but some of you, maybe you were struggling and you felt rushed. So that's why I'm giving this additional day to work on that. So while you are drawing that and turning this as your proof of practice, if you are done and you're one of those people that achieved higher than that, pick a nose, any nose, and start drawing that on the side. I have this do's and don'ts for drawing the noses, and I'm going to play that today. So you can kind of pay attention to that in the background if you'd like. Or should I have you guys play this on your own? My concern is you won't watch it if I don't play it live in class. It's 14 minutes long. Um, Juliana, what are your thoughts?
I think you should play it. I like having it in the background while I work.
All right, that sounds good to me. Thank you.
Mhm.
Leroy just got here. Anybody else coming late? So we're finishing up the proof of practice. I'm going to go ahead and take a screenshot of what I want for the proof of practice so that nobody can say they're confused and they didn't know because I put it here. I took a screenshot of it and I'm going to post it as your proof of practice right now. And then I'll start playing the do's and don'ts of how to draw the nose. Noses are one of the hardest things, and it's really important. It's smack dab in the middle of your face, and if you don't get it right, it changes the whole look of the person. So let me go ahead and just change this to Friday. Yay, it's Friday. I get to sleep in tomorrow. I couldn't sleep at all. The rain was so loud. Complete front side, three-quarter view, and bottom view of the nose sketches. And I'm going to delete this picture and I'm going to add the picture that I just took so you can't say you don't know what's due today. Don't play with me. I explained it in my video and I attached it. So it's this bad boy right here. And it is due today at 3 p.m. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Sign. So if you're confused, it's there for you. And I'm going to go ahead and start playing the video. Leroy, I marked you here. Are you with me?
Thank you, Ms. Brown. I appreciate it.
So for the proof of practice today, you got to finish that front, side, and three-quarter view and below view of the nose, okay? So you got to make sure you have all the steps, step 1, 2, and 3. And that's the proof of practice for today. Daniel L. is just joining us as well. And so hopefully you guys are following the directions that are on the agenda. And now I'm going to play a video for you guys about the do's and don'ts of drawing noses while you're working on your proof of practice. How do I make it bigger?
Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'm Kirsty.
I'm trying to make it bigger. Does anybody have any questions before I start this video?
Do we draw with her?
No, you're just watching and learning. Ah, man, I just clicked the wrong thing. You are drawing those noses. Unless you finished all your noses already, you can draw along with her. That's fun. I want you to keep, working on them. Okay, she's got a funny voice. She's not from America. I thought you guys would get a little giggle out of it. So is everybody on the same page of what you're doing today? Your proof of practice is a photograph. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to play this so you guys can just kind of learn more about noses while you're working on your proof of practice.
And in today's video, I'm going to be doing the highly requested do's and don'ts video for noses. So here's the final versions, and so I'm starting off by doing the don't drawing. I've also done other do's and don'ts videos for hair, lips, and also eyes, so I'll leave a link up above so you can check them out. I'll put them in a playlist so you can go and watch them all. And so I'm starting off with the sketch, and the first mistake that I see beginners making is when they're doing the sketch and they don't look at their reference photo closely enough and check that they've got all the dimensions and angles correct when they're drawing out the different structures of the noses. They're too focused with thinking about how they're drawing a nose rather than drawing the individual shapes and forms that make up the nose. So try to make sure that when you're looking at your reference photo, you're just looking at the shapes that you've got to draw and don't focus too much on the fact that you're drawing a nose. Especially if you find drawing noses the hardest part of drawing a face, if you're just thinking constantly about the fact that you're drawing a nose, then you're more likely to rush through it and get a bit more anxious when you come to drawing that part. The next common mistake is when it comes to doing the nostrils, and a lot of people make the mistake of doing them really, really dark and also doing them very circular so that they're big dark circles, when in actual fact, most of the time you don't see the whole of the nostril unless the person is looking up and you've got the view of the whole of their nostrils. The
So this
next
is
common
what
mistake
not to
is when you
do.
actually start shading in the nose and laying down all the shadows. So the mistake with this is the way you use your strokes. So if you do really messy strokes, then it will be a lot less realistic and you won't get a very smooth look and you'll be able to see all the individual strokes that you're making. So I recommend using circular motions instead. And then once you've applied down all your shadows and you're happy with that and you want to blend it out, the common mistake is to use your fingers because your fingers have a lot of oil and grease, and this can make your shading a bit uneven and unpredictable. And it also just means that you're getting grease residue on your paper, which will make it a bit less archival. And a final mistake is when you do your highlights, especially down the bridge of the nose, a lot of people do just a line and a really harsh highlight. So the highlight will tend to be in the middle of the nose, but a lot of people just do that really harsh white line, whereas it might be where it's a bit harsher in the middle, and then even in the rest of the middle of the nose, it'll be a bit softer, which I'll show you what I mean later on. And also, a mistake when doing the highlight is to use just a really big eraser and to not really think about the individual shapes of the highlights, but just to sweep that eraser down the middle of the nose and not really think too much about the highlights are working and how the light is bouncing off the nose. So this video is mainly for people that really want to level up their realistic drawing and really want to go to that next level and make their drawings even more realistic. So don't get disheartened if your drawings look like this. This is actually meant to be what a lot of beginners' drawings should look like. So this isn't me trying to say these drawings are really, really rubbish. It's just me trying to say that if you're a beginner, your drawings might look like the don't version and you might want to push it a bit further towards the do version. So these are just some tips for how you can do that. Okay, so that's it for the don't version, and now I'm going to move on to the do version. So the first thing that I'm doing, as you can tell already, I'm doing my sketch really, really slowly, and I'm really looking at the reference photo to make sure that I've got all the angles correct, and I'm not thinking of the fact that I'm drawing a nose and that I'm drawing nostrils. I'm just looking at the individual shapes that the nose is made up of and replicating that onto the paper. So really take your time. Drawing out the initial sketch should be the most time-consuming part of the drawing, because if this is inaccurate, then even if you do amazing shading, if you haven't got the basic structure of the nose right, then it just won't look realistic because you still got to have the structure right. So I'm just building up that sketch and I'm blocking in mainly the main outlines of the nose, and also I'm blocking in where the shadows and the highlights will be, so that when I go in and start shading, I'll have some general guides to help me block in the shadows, and I'll know where not to apply the pencil because of where the highlights will be. So the materials that I'm using for this are, I am using Derwent graphic pencils in the grades 6B and also the 4B. And then I'm also using the extra hard General's charcoal pencil. But if you don't have charcoal, that's completely fine. Just use a darker version of the graphite pencils, so say like a 6B or an 8B. But I really like using charcoal just because you don't get any shine from it. And I don't like having shine on my drawings. But if you don't mind the shine, then just go for a really dark graphite pencil. Okay, so once I've done the initial sketch, I'm then going in with that charcoal pencil and I'm using this to block in the darkest portions of the drawing, which is the nostrils and also a bit of the lower part of the nose, because that's where a lot of the shadow is, because that part is not in direct lighting. But even though I'm doing the nostrils dark, I'm making sure that I'm not just doing circles and I'm also tapering off where that shadow is as well. I'm not just doing a really harsh circle. I'm going to blend it and make it more of a soft transition. I'm then going in with the B pencil and I'm using this to block in all of the shadows and basically get my structure a bit more so I can see where the shadows are, but I'm leaving certain areas free of any graphite because this is where the highlights will be. And again, this just depends on your reference photo. All noses are different, they'll have different widths, and some will be longer than others, and stuff like that. So it's really important that you look at your reference photo. I'm also using very circular motions and I'm building it up in light layers. I'm not applying a lot of pressure at all because I don't want to have strokes that are really visible. I want it to be able to blend out really softly. So I'm not applying hard on the pencil at all. Once I've marked in all the shadows with the B pencil, I'm going in with that darker 4B pencil to mark in the even darker shadows in the nose. So I'm using this to really start to show where the structure of the darkest parts of the nose is. And as you can see, when I start adding that 4B pencil, it really starts to make the drawing look three-dimensional. I really like using the graphite pencils and I will use a 4B pencil because if I don't apply the pencil too hard, then I don't get shine. And when I go and blend it out, it will get rid of all that shine anyway. So I don't mind using the graphite pencils up until the 4B because I won't get shine with this. But anything beyond that, I find that I still get quite a lot of shine. So when I blend this out, I'm going to be using a cotton bud and I'm just using a dry, clean cotton bud and I'm going to be using that to blend it and I'll be using circular motions to do that. Also, if you've used a cotton bud and it'll start to build up some of the charcoal powder and the graphite powder, it's really good if you want to darken some areas but you don't want to apply lots of extra pencil to it. So you can really tell how much more time I'm spending doing this and I'm really thinking about all the pencil strokes that I'm making. I'm not just doing them everywhere because I think that's what the nose should be. All I'm doing is looking at the reference photo and marking in where those shadows are. Okay, so now I'm going in and I'm blending it out, and as you can see, it really smooths it out and makes it look really soft, and it gets rid of all the white graininess. It does get rid of the structure a bit because it's blending everything in together, but this is just the first layer. I'll be going in and darkening up the shadows and adding the highlights, which will bring the structure back out. So don't worry about it too much, but this just means that I've got my base foundation layer down and I can still see the general areas where the shadows are and where the structure is. So now I'm going in for the second layer, and again I'm going in and re-darkening up those darkest areas because when you blend it out it lightens them up a bit. So I'm just building up that dark shadow and I'm blending it out as I go, and then I'll just work around the rest of the nose and start to add more shadows and really look at your reference photo to get that contrast right. If you want to do realistic drawing, I really recommend that you always use a reference photo because it's really hard for you to imagine all this stuff really realistically. You really need to look at a reference photo if you want to do photorealism. So I'm just building up the shadows and I'm blending as I go this time. the areas where it's not so dark, I use the 4B pencil and the B pencil instead to add the shadows. I just use the charcoal pencil for the really, really dark shadows. Otherwise, if I try to add shading using the charcoal pencil on areas that aren't very dark, then it will just give me a really, really grainy look and it won't look very good. So the key to doing realism and making things look realistic is to use really soft shading and not to have any real harsh lines. Everything should subtly blend into each other and have really soft changes between the shadows and the highlights, because our face doesn't have really harsh outlines, it's just shadows and highlights from where the light is bouncing off individual areas. So for the moment, I'm not focusing on the highlights, I'm just focusing on building up the shadows. I'll focus on the highlights once I've done all the shadows.
Now I know she's using a different material than what we're using.
So as you can see, when I was doing the nostrils, it does look really dark, but it also doesn't look really harsh either. It's quite prominent where those dark nostrils are, but it's still softly transitioned into areas around it. So it doesn't just look like only the nostrils are dark, because the rest of the underneath of the nose is also dark as well.
No matter what material, it's the same concept.
So I think the first nose only took me about 3 to 5 minutes to do, but this nose took me a lot longer. It took me more like 45 minutes, which can seem like a really long time, but it's definitely worth it if you're trying to get realistic results, because
Ours will be
realism is a
faster
really
in
slow thing
graphite.
to do, because you've got to try and make sure that your shading is really soft. So if you want to do realism, then expect to spend a lot of time sitting and doing this. It's not going to be something really quick.
So next week we will be drawing from images your nose of your choice. Make sure you do your proof of practice today of step number 3. If you have any questions, I'm here. You can always refer back to these videos for pointers. And this is just a very generic nose. Some are wider, some are pointier. But it's very subtle transitions, no outlines.
So now I'm working on the highlights, and I'm using a kneaded eraser because it will get you softer highlights, because it won't just lift lots of the pencil off, but it also means that you can get harsher highlights if you keep applying the kneaded eraser to a certain area. And the highlights, as you can see, aren't just straight lines. There's lots of individual shapes to the highlights, and they're all quite varied. Also, if you want to get some good highlights and lift some of the graphite off without having a really harsh highlight, clean tissue paper is really good, because if you just use a bit of clean tissue paper, then it will lift some of the graphite off, which will help lighten that area. So that's really good if you want to lighten up an area and then add an intenser highlight on top, which is what I did in the middle of the nose. So you can see that the middle of the nose has quite a lot of highlight to it, but it also means the strongest highlight is right in the center of that middle of the nose, as well as the whole area being a bit highlighted. So I leave the highlights right to the end to do, because it's what makes it pop, and it also just brings everything out. And once you've done the highlights, you don't really want to go in and add lots of shadows and shading, because it might muddy up the highlights and they won't stay as bright. Anyway, guys, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and remember to check out my other do's and don'ts videos. I'll leave a link to the playlist so you can look at them all. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're new to my channel,
All right. So I hope you found that interesting and helpful, because I noticed a lot of students put in harsh outlines. We want everything very soft to look realistic. So you can see the difference here between the don't and the do, which is much more realistic. She has fantastic do's and don'ts. And there's a lot of them out there on YouTube for hair, eyes, nose, mouth, lips, bodies, you name it. It's out there and available at your fingertips. I only wish I had this kind of knowledge at my fingertips when I was your age. So I hope that helped. Make sure you have this ready to roll for your proof of practice today by 3 p.m. Any questions? Does anybody need anything? I'm going to start grading We'll continue grading the Martin Luther Kings and any proof of practices. I'm trying to load it all before the end of the day. I'm gonna go ahead and stop my video.